Okay. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. My name is Donald, and I'm here to talk to you about VIA, a project I've been working on for the last few months. So last week I was working on this deck, I think it was Wednesday, and interestingly enough, a notification from the Arweave dev Discord popped up. The user was curious whether you could use Arweave more like a traditional Web 2 database. And that's just it, right? Currently, you can't. There's no ecosystem standard for accomplishing this right now. And I can relate. Like everyone else, when I first discovered Arweave, I was really intrigued by the premise of permanent decentralized storage. A lot of us coming into Web3 are used to relying on solutions like MongoDB or similar, but when it comes to Arweave, there's no real equivalent. Rather than reaching for something recognizable, developers new to the ecosystem are forced to use two relatively unfamiliar tools instead. The first is the Arweave.js library for writing data to Arweave, and the second is GraphQL for reading data from Arweave. Both tools are great for what they are, but they're low-level, domain-specific, and decoupled from each other. For those starting out, building dApps on Arweave ends up feeling pretty convoluted as a result. Developers are forced to jump between two abstractions, diverting them from the real task at hand, developing their product. Depending on the complexity of their needs, they may also find themselves spending a bunch of time trying to reinvent the wheel around data schematization. VIA, on the other hand, provides a unified interface for all of this. So rather than running around between Arweave.js and GraphQL, developers are able to interact with a single library instead. This obviously streamlines things. It also starts to give way to a mental shift where the experience starts to feel familiar, a lot more like using a traditional database. So I'll also touch here on a couple of the more technical conveniences VIA brings to the table. VIA is by design an object mapper, allowing for seamless translation or mapping between objects in your code and documents on Arweave. Again, this brings a level of familiarity to the development experience. The semantics are also made dead simple, and so the API ends up feeling a lot more intuitive and expressive in general. VIA ships with a number of optimizations baked in as well. For instance, when making modifications to a document, VIA will only write what's changed instead of rewriting the entire document. This is obviously a no-brainer that saves developers on both data costs and response times. Same thing goes for compression. Less cost up front with less data to push around. So you may be wondering at this point how VIA actually works. To start, there's a configuration step. This covers the basics and resembles other database configurations. VIA needs to know what you'd like your collections to be called, for instance. After that, we're ready to operate. VIA exposes a basic CRUD-like interface. It goes without saying, the point of Arweave is not to destroy your content, so VIA approaches the traditional destroy operation as a hide instead. I'll do a little walkthrough now, and I'll show you how you would use VIA to create a permanent decentralized document. So let's first imagine that you would like to build an application, and that application is centered around storing collections of books. Books, of course, can be logically schematized into things like fiction and nonfiction. To get started, we'll connect to a store using our store ID. Upon connecting, VIA will return one or more collections. In this case, we have a fiction collection. From there, we'll start a new document. And once we have a document, we can start to think about making property assignments. So in this case, we'll add a title, an author, and a year. You'll notice that this just works. There's no difference here between making assignments to a document and making assignments to regular JavaScript objects. Before uploading, maybe our user is interested in the price of saving the document. VIA makes that really easy too. At some point, we'll go ahead and actually save the document. This is done by providing a private key and calling the save method. As a side note here, if the developer knows ahead of time that their user will be using a browser extension like ArConnect, then we can actually exclude the private key altogether, which is really exciting from the perspective of achieving Web 2 parity. Next, once the upload is complete, the save method will return a transaction object, which we can interact with as well. And that's actually it. As you can tell, there's no mixing levels of abstraction. If you're familiar with the current tooling, you'll notice just how dramatically VIA simplifies things. With VIA, we don't need to know much at all about Arweave internals in order to take advantage of what Arweave offers. VIA will be a profit-sharing community with a circulating supply of VIA profit-sharing tokens. Like other PSCs, mechanisms will be in place to reward community members in the form of micro-dividends or tips. There were something like 200,000 transactions on the Arweave network in the last week alone, the vast majority of which flowed through the current tooling described earlier. VIA aims to capture a convincing proportion of this market. Still working out the numbers, so please take this with a big grain of salt, but VIA could easily charge something like 1 cent for every document uploaded. In terms of broader timeline, development began last December. The library is still in pre-alpha, but there will be something to play around with this month or next. Once a public release is available, I will be concentrating my attention on the next milestone of piloting the product within the community. From there are plans to develop a web client, allowing store owners to view or peek inside their database collections, creating a more integrated experience for VIA users. That's it for now. I'm HBauer on Discord. If you're interested in being one of VIA's first users, there's already a growing beta list. Feel free to reach out about that or about the project in general. VIA also has its own Discord server. That's where I'll be making announcements first in regards to release schedule and about community movements in general. Thank you.